Silent Hill 2 has the best supernatural horror in gaming. While there are many subgenres of horror, supernatural horror is often regarded as the least scary, because there's no basis in reality to resonate with the viewer. It's hard for them to imagine themselves in that situation. While slasher horror films could potentially happen to you, so there's a much more personal feeling of fear, as it's plausible that someone in a mask could break into your house and kill you, although I have some religious family members who don't mind scary shows like The Last of Us, but would sooner eat their own leg than watch anything remotely satanic. Supernatural horror is also a much more confusing style of horror. I sometimes don't understand the direct threat being posed, such as in Hereditary, and without a creature like Samara Morgan or Pennywise, it's hard to be scared of something intangible. But Silent Hill 2 uses its supernatural elements better than any game I've seen. Where most supernatural horror is used to disorientate and frighten the viewer, Silent Hill 2 is unashamedly disgusting. Its creatures are perverse and made of rotted flesh. All of them have vague sexual themes to them and spray you with revolting congealed fluids. Where the supernatural often doesn't reveal itself to the viewer, as staying in the shadows is more unsettling, Silent Hill 2 is so upfront about being hideous and repulsive that it's the perfect type of game where you would say it leaves nothing to the imagination. But it oh so does, but we'll get to that later. It's not only the monsters of Silent Hill 2 that are meant to be revolting, it's the environments we explore as well. Everything is grody and dilapidated, with rot and decay overtaking every inch of the town. Where supernatural horror is often about corruption, it's usually presented in a way for the protagonist to prevent or undo that corruption. Silent Hill 2 has James arrive long after the corruption has taken place, and it's not even about reverting the town back to its original state. This characterizes James as someone with nothing left to live for. He doesn't care about anything around him, he only wants to find Mary. He doesn't have any noticeable or even human reactions to the grotesque horror around him, indicating that he has no self-preservation, wading more into the fog to aimlessly search for the one thing that will make him whole again. A trap that most horror authors fall into is the author deciding that they need to give the audience answers to what the evil creature is at the end of the second act, removing all tension from the monster. People aren't scared of the monster itself, they're scared of not knowing what the monster is or where it came from. That's why It Part 1 is considered much better than its sequel, and why people still talk about films like The Blair Witch Project and It Follows. At the same time, many legendary horror franchises have fallen from grace, because the writers can't put the genie back in the bottle and make old killers scary now that we know everything about them. Supernatural horror rarely explains itself. Often, this is because it doesn't need to, and just explains itself away as an evil spirit or demon. But the genericness of a faceless evil can struggle to intimidate audiences who can't see a face or monster to be scared of. Silent Hill 2 is maybe the only horror project I can think of where the monsters actually become scarier after it's explained what they are. At the beginning of the game, these are just generic writhing creatures who just so happen to infest Silent Hill. James never questions this or tries to figure out what these monsters are, which we as the player accept as just him not being all there. But at the end of the game, when it's revealed that all these creatures are manifestations of James's guilt and urges, they cease to be the fodder enemies they had to be so a video game could happen, and instead, we feel sick knowing that our character created all of these hideous beasts, so that he could torture himself because he wanted to hurt himself for what he did to his wife. By telling us that the monsters don't come from some Geiger-esque nightmare world, but the subconscious of our own character, we're more disturbed by them and James himself, as his detachment attitude could have never prepared us for this intense hatred towards himself. Instead of removing all the mystery from the supernatural elements like other media would, Silent Hill 2 downplays its mystery by telling us through James not to care about the why. That doesn't matter to him. He doesn't question it, nor does he take steps to find out what these creatures are. By downplaying the fact that there's even a mystery to solve, and tricking us into thinking that these are just random monsters so the game could have combat, it can wham us later for making us forget that these are prominent questions we should be asking, even if our character couldn't care less about the horrors around him. I also love when this twist happens, in the last 30 minutes of the game. This means that we're not confronted with any more monsters after we know what they are, and the game doesn't have to give us a chance to lose our fear of the monsters. It only leaves us with the retrospective realization of what they were, encouraging us to replay the game and figure out all the symbolism. Silent Hill 2 is not the best horror game of all time. I'd put games like Dead Space 1 and RE's 4 and 7 above it, but in the realm of supernatural horror, Silent Hill 2 reigns supreme as the most creative and excellent supernatural horror game of all time. I'll be back in 2 days. In the meantime, here's a video about how the Silent Hill 2 remake needs to include the dog ending.